out, cause I'm here now and I'm staying. Claws out, this the fight that I've been craving. I know there's something inside of me, but it's been masked by fear and anxiety. But no more, I'ma break out of the chains. Let's go! I'm waking up, this ain't enough. All of my dreams were starting to rust, but I believe that I can adjust. Positive thoughts, I'm starting to trust. Nothing's as hard unless you work. Something of worth requires an urge. I have been hurt by those at their worst, but that gave me will, some power, a surge.
And they know that I won't surrender, so they fear me as a contender. When I fight, they always remember. I will be known, I won't let go. I will not stop, I will be great. I will be known, I won't let go. I will not stop, I will be great. We can get it closer, we can last much longer. We can get it closer, and we can last much longer.
I am a hunter, I've been filled with demons and hunger. I am the thunder, I command the masses in numbers. Look at the fear in their eyes, this is what happens when you are surprised. It's time to meet your demise, just call me Zeus and look to the sky. Everything's amplified, no they cannot deny, I will be rectified. If you dissect me, find scars, teach you left behind. Injuries that define me to my core, they'll hit me raw like never before. The pain I absorb is feeding my core, I'm hard to ignore. I'll beat down your door, if you wanted war, well then you got war.
And they know that I won't surrender, so they fear me as a contender. When I fight, they always remember, yeah. I will be known, I won't let go. I will not stop, I will be great. I will be known, I won't let go. I will not stop, I will be great. We can hit it longer, we can last much longer. We can hit it longer, and we can last much longer.
Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us.
Just one phone call. On Wednesday, 4th of February, 1987, the Tallahassee police received a phone call from a woman who claimed she was witnessing a suspicious sight. According to her, she saw two men in suits watching over 6 children. The children in her description looked very untidy. This suspicious yet irrelevant event would lead to a very noteworthy case of child abuse done by a cult believed to be funded by the CIA, America's darling intelligence agency, believed to have been formed as an intelligence agency in 1947 to act as a clearinghouse to source information in foreign countries that could have any potential effect on the United States. But over the years, the CIA has had several controversies that seem to go against its purpose, some of which have gone against the human rights of Americans. That one call from Tallahassee added to the list of those controversies as it linked them to the alleged child abuse cult, the Finders.
And scrutiny on the activities of satanic cults.
Stories of devil worship and satanic cults corrupting young minds.
Unbelievable crime at the hands of satanic cults.
Possibly satanic messages on some rock music recording.
Where the largest mass suicide in American history took place.
Who are the Finders? The Finders is a cult group that was formed in the early 1960s by former Air Force Master Sergeant Marion Petty in Washington. What was its purpose? Petty claimed he started the group as a charity body to help raise children in a community-themed environment. But the 1987 case would seem to change the narrative of what the Finders cult is all about. With the information received from their caller, the Tallahassee police wasted no time to show up at the given location. What they found will create unrest. The men were questioned to assess their relationship with the children. The men, both of whom were later identified as Douglas Ammerman and James Michael Hallwell, claimed to be teachers to the children. When asked where they were taking the children, they said they were on their way to Mexico to transfer the children to a school for brilliant children. When asked about the whereabouts of their mothers, they said the children were being weaned from their mothers. As a next step of action, the police proceeded to inspect the van in which the men came in. A heavy stench was the first thing that greeted the officers when they opened the van. Inside the van looked very dirty, and it also appeared that all 8 of them, the 2 men and the 6 children, had been living inside the van for quite a while. The items found inside the van included a mattress, a computer, 20 floppy disks, maps, some books, and letters. With the suspicious evidence found in the van, both suspects were put into police custody. To get information, the police also questioned the children, but none of them agreed to talk to the police except a young girl called Mary. Mary informed the police about the house they used to live in. When asked whether the men were their teachers, Mary confirmed it to be true, but not in the sense of what a teacher would teach in a formal educational system. According to Mary, the men taught them the game. What was this game like? We're about to find out. The game, as described by Mary, involved them, the children, stealing the shirts of the men, and then they'd put holes into these shirts. Also, there were times when they'd take these shirts off the men and then put them back on quickly, after which they'd search the men's pockets for any change or money they could find. When asked who was in charge of this game, Mary said she didn't know his real name, and the name they usually called him was either the game caller or the stroller. This sounds like Saw. When asked by the officers where they were coming from and heading to, Mary said they were coming from the house, but she had no idea where they were or where they were being taken to. Mary spoke further about the house where she claimed she lived with her mother and other children. According to her description, the house did not in any way match that of a foster home. Mary also spoke further about their diet and what it was like to live in the house. According to her, their diet consisted of mostly fruits and vegetables, and that they were only fed these as a reward for completing a task and not because feeding them was a necessity. To evaluate the children, the police brought out different home appliances for the children to identify. These appliances include a typewriter, stapler, computer, etc. To the surprise of the officers, none of the children were able to identify these items, which, at that time, were considered as common household items. The children themselves also showed signs of malnourishment, with their bodies filled with bite marks, and none of them wore underwear. But here is where it gets really weird. The police also carried out a health and wellness evaluation on the children, and from their analysis, they discovered that Mary and another child named Max had suffered sexual abuse. Both men were then sent to jail for child sexual abuse. Since all parties involved claimed they were from Washington, D.C., the Tallahassee Police Department contacted the Washington Police to see if there was any possibility of identifying the children. While the Washington Police were unable to find any information about the 6 children, their discovery led to an even deeper investigation of the case. In their message to the Tallahassee Police, the Washington Police claimed that they didn't have any information about the children. It could be possible that they probably were part of a cult group that resided in Glover Park, Washington, known as the Finders. The Washington Police's knowledge about the cult had come as a result of complaints they'd previously received in the past regarding the cult, complaints which they'd not acted on, as, according to them, were not serious enough to concern the police into carrying out a proper investigation. With the information provided by the Tallahassee Police, the Washington Police took it upon themselves to pay a visit at the location where the Finders were said to be based. By the time the Washington Police arrived at the said location, they were welcomed into a space. Not a single soul was found on the site. The course of investigation unearthed other cases, including one of a lady who claimed they'd tried to recruit her. According to the lady, she said the Finders were involved in what she described as brainwashing. This wasn't the regular type of brainwashing in which people are manipulated into believing things they normally wouldn't believe. This was more serious. In this case, individuals involved would have their minds completely washed out of any information or knowledge they had, and new information or knowledge would be given to these individuals. This was done to ensure that followers remained loyal to the course. If you think that's weird, wait for the next part. During their investigation, police found some very disturbing evidence, some of which came in the form of pictures. Some of these pictures portrayed naked children and adults. In one of the pictures, a child was seen taking out a kid from the womb. Calm down, I'm talking about the child of a goat. In another picture, an adult held a blood-stained goat in front of a child who looked scared. Several of these pictures had children with blood on their hands performing sacrifices. Disturbing facts about the Finders. How did the Finders cult grow, and what strange methods did they employ when someone tried to leave the group or when family friends attempted to reach out to their loved ones? According to an interview found in an article written by a journalist in the city paper, David, the person being interviewed, was a brother to a man who had joined the cult, and upon joining, did what almost any cult participants would do: isolate themselves from their family. According to David, when he tried to contact his brother by sending him a sarcastic letter, asking him how he was coping in the place where, according to him, David, he was behaving like a spy with his landlord. In time, he got a response from one of the companies set up by the Finders. They wrote a letter to him. The contents of the letter described what it was like to have sex with his brother. They'd also given the brother a nickname, Douglas Aka Ernest Angel. According to the journalist, this was what they did for anybody who tried to contact a family member. They would send letters to them describing what it was like to have sex with their family member who was part of them. So how does this case concern the CIA? CIA linked to the case. At the time of the investigation done in 1987, Petty's son was said to be working with Air America, an airline company that at that time was a frontline airspace for the CIA. This is the same airline now known as Southern Air Transport, the same airline which would later be associated with notorious child trafficker Jeffrey Epstein and his colleagues. Also, before the death of Petty's wife Isabella, records showed that she worked for the CIA around the period Petty started the group. Secondly, and furthermost of all, was the presence of retired CIA agent Sidney Gottlieb, who at that time had made a home for himself in Culpeper, Washington, where the Finders were known to mostly carry out their activities. Who is Sidney Gottlieb? The New York Times described him in an article in 2019 with these exact words: "The brains behind the eventual CIA program it helped spawn, MK Ultra, the notorious research endeavor that employed mind-altering drugs, including LSD." The same article goes on to describe Gottlieb as a chemist with a deep-seated interest in mysticism, the first person the United States government ever hired to find ways to control human minds. If you recall, the lady who claimed she was being forced to join the Finders spoke earlier about the Finders being involved in some sort of brainwashing of their followers. And, by coincidence, the man who had been the starting point of a sort of mind control program at the CIA ended up retiring in the same town where the Finders were starting to become very active. You might ask, what purpose did the CIA stand to benefit from these activities? A report dated April 13, 1987, by the MVP, labeled Secret, had this to say: "It is the writer's sick belief that the Finders organization is and has been utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency as a disinformation service spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the United States and overseas. This group, to sick the most part, is made up of overeducated non-achievers who lack the inborn initiative to succeed on their own. Therefore, they fell in with a charismatic leader who gave them direction and self-importance. To sick the most part, this organization individually is harmless. However, sick, when directed and monitored by a controlling factor, they are capable of destructive and illegal activities." The agent who had written the report also provided evidence of the Finders group being involved in child trafficking, intent to kidnap, trade, and purchase of children, amongst other crimes, which partially include trying to take control of the government. But before any progress could be made on the case, the CIA came and closed the case. Sadly and coincidentally, one of the agents involved in the case, Stitcher, died of septic shock just a few years after, leaving the other agent, Martinez, without any alibi to his allegations against the CIA when the case later resurfaced following a DOJ inquiry made by a senator in 1993. The case went cold again after this inquiry until 2019, when the FBI released documents concerning the case to the public. Despite the evidence gathered and the connections between the Finders Group and the CIA and other known sex offenders, nothing much was done about the case. It is still believed that, until he died in 2002, Teddy still roamed the streets of Culpeper freely. But I end this in the same way everyone also who has spoken on this case has done, asking the question, were the Finders child abusers, or were they simply just misunderstood? And also, are the controversies about the CIA true?
So, I don't think I need to tell you that the Central Intelligence Agency is just a bit shady, to say the least. I've done a number of videos about the CIA at this point, exposing the many strange, shady, and stupid things that the agency has got up to. But this video might just be the most disturbing one yet. Really, just some crazy stuff in this one. Today, you're gonna learn how the CIA helped literal Nazis escape justice by smuggling them out of Germany, how the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, was actually proven to be part of the CIA's mind control program, MKUltra, and how the CIA actively stopped and covered up an investigation into a satanic, child-abusing cult because they may have been using it as a, quote, front gone bad. And it's all, unfortunately, completely true. For those who know my channel, this is the next entry in my iceberg series on the CIA. You're in the right place. Now let's get into it. Finders. What if I told you that there was once a police investigation into a real, genuine, satanic, child-abusing cult that was mysteriously halted and covered up by the CIA because they were allegedly using the cult as a front that had, quote, gone bad? Well, that's what I'm telling you. That actually happened. Strap in and get your popcorn out, folks. The CIA actually did that. I know, it sounds a little kooky, but seriously, we're gonna get into it. There's FBI documents we're gonna look at. There's US Customs documents we're gonna look at. It's crazy shit, and it's also very disturbing. Obviously, I mentioned the child abuse stuff, the Satanism, it's a cult. Viewer discretion is advised, okay? If you got a weak stomach, maybe skip to the next segment, which will be in like an hour, because this one's really long, because it's very interesting. To understand the story of the Finders, let's start this case off where everyone else in the general public did, Tallahassee, Florida, circa 1987. Was this all simply a case of Florida man striking again? Maybe. Probably not. It all started with an anonymous phone call reporting some very strange sightings in Myers Park, Tallahassee. A little too strange, in fact, a little questionably strange. But when police arrived at the park in question, they quickly saw that the call was not, in fact, a Bart Simpson-esque prank designed to waste their time, but was the first lead into a case the magnitude of which these officers could have never imagined. So the caller had told the police that they had seen two men neatly dressed in full suits who were watching over 6 dirty, stinky children that basically all looked and smelled like Pigpen from Charlie Brown. So when the police arrived, they in fact did see that the children were, yes, rank as f***, with the official report drafted later stating that the children were indeed very dirty, covered in insect bites, and all had very clearly not bathed in several days. The police report also stated that most of the children were not wearing underwear, which I'm not sure if that just means that they were completely naked, or if the cops, like, checked under there for their underwear. I don't know, but either of those outcomes is very strange nonetheless. In stark contrast to these deeply dirty, disheveled dependents, the men were clean, well-groomed, and again, wearing full, fancy pants suits and ties. Well, okay, they were at least wearing full suits, that's for sure, which would imply that they were probably taking just as much care to their personal hygiene, but to be fair, that may have been kind of hard to do properly, given that the two men had apparently been living with all 6 of these dirty, insect-ridden, unbathed, underwearless children in their 1979 Dodge van for quite some time, which reportedly also smelled, not the best.
Close that window, you're letting all the stank out.
So the police then, obviously finding 2 well-dressed men living in a van with 6 stinky children, just a bit sus, decided to take a look and a smell inside the vehicle. After their search, the officers noted that the van did not contain very many items other than a computer, 20 floppy disks, and, most disturbingly, a stinky old mattress. Nothing sus about that at all, is there?
I'm in danger!
Well, most disturbingly for now, there were some details left out of this report that we'll get to in a bit. Why? We'll get into that also in a bit. Just wait. This case, it goes very deep. After being questioned by the police, the men claimed that the children were being weaned from their mothers, whom they said were back in Washington, D.C. The men also claimed to the police that they were the children's teachers and that they were simply transporting the kids to a school for brilliant children in Mexico, of all places. Now, I'm no scientist, okay, but I am pretty sure that Mexican school for the incredibly gifted, really Mexican school at all, is kind of an oxymoron there.
Is this the Mexican space program?
Space key? Fly?
But then again, they are in Florida, so, you know, the same concept does apply down there as well. I went to fucking elementary school in Louisiana, dude, okay? I know how y'all do it down in the South. I did not learn shit. I ate a lot of Play-Doh, though. Those were good times. These two men were eventually identified as one Douglas Edward Ammerman, age 27, and one Michael Houlihan, age 28. The cops arrested the men pretty immediately after seeing this, you know, incredibly suspect situation, and the two men were later charged with misdemeanor child abuse. And should have been charged with much more than that, but again, we'll get into it. According to the arrest report, Houlihan, quote, fell face down on the ground and refused to stand up during the questioning.
I've fallen, and I can't get up!
Shut up, Grandma!
Guy was a planking enthusiast. The police also brought the 6 stinky children, whose ages ranged from 2 to 7, into the station to try and get to the bottom of all this, but it seemed that the children's questioning only raised more questions. The cops reported that 5 of the 6 children were basically uncommunicative. They didn't really know English, and also noted that just like the Amish, they didn't seem to recognize modern comforts like typewriters, electricity, or even hot water. So yeah, that whole school for the brilliant children excuse, not looking the most plausible at this point, with the children not even knowing how to speak and all, but again, you know, the school was supposedly in Mexico. Maybe that's just what counts as brilliant over there. The report also stated that medical examination of the children revealed that they had, quote, bite marks potentially belonging to an adult human. So that's just one of the many fucked up things that we will see from this case. Don't bite kids and adults. Don't bite people. There was one child who was able to communicate to the investigators, however, and she was identified as one Mary Houlihan, if that's even her real name, which it was not, apparently. I guess the children, quote, did not have proper names. I don't really know what that means exactly, since they were all listed with names, but my sources also said that they did not have proper names, so I don't know what's going on there. A lot of the names did seem just like standard regular names, but yeah, a few of them did definitely sound a little interesting. One of the kids was called Benjamin Franklin, if that sheds some light on this at all. In fact, there seemed to be so much name-related confusion happening here that when Mary was asked what her last name was, she replied, quote, which one? So that's not creepy at all for a dirty, naked child living in a van with a bunch of other naked, mute, yet apparently brilliant Mexico-bound children to say. And that was certainly not the last of Mary's interesting tidbits that she told the police during this questioning. Mary told the cops that the children pretty much lived exclusively on raw fruits and vegetables and were only fed as a, quote, reward for good behavior. And they apparently they were apparently kind of naughty, as they all showed clear signs of malnourishment. Obviously, that's a joke. I probably shouldn't be joking about this. It's obviously the people who's feeding them's fucking fault that they're not eating. Mary, who was also the oldest of the children at 7 years old, also very unfortunately and disturbingly showed signs of sexual abuse, which is, again, disturbing and disgusting. The child is 7 years old, you freaks. I will never understand people like that. And by the way, while you soak up all of this terrible knowledge in your mushy little brain box, keep in the back of your mind that little tidbit I mentioned up top, that the goddamn CIA is involved in all of this, all right? Mary continued to talk to the police and told them that the men were in fact the children's teachers, whatever that means in this context, and when asked what the men taught them, Mary replied, how to play games. So this was just creepy, weird-ass sentence after creepy, weird-ass sentence coming out of this dirty, little, naked 7-year-old who doesn't even know her last name. I have a sneaking suspicion that these naked, malnourished, dirty children weren't just getting some football and Yahtzee lessons here. What the hell does teach us how to play games mean? Mary also informed the cops that she lived on a commune in Washington, D.C. with many other children and adults who would all receive instructions about these games from their leader, a man known as the Game Caller, who was later discovered to be a guy named Marion Petty. So, this is a cult, right? That child just described a cult, right? A giant commune with a weirdly titled leader who instructs everyone on how to play games. That things are starting to sound pretty Jonestownish over here. And the Tallahassee police would later find out that this textbook cult was known as the Finders. And who were the Finders, you ask? Well, I think it's time for me to give you some backstory there. The cult leader and so-called game caller, Marion Petty, was a retired Air Force Master Sergeant who founded the Finders in the 1960s. Like all good cult leaders of the time, Petty attempted to source prospective cult members from the counterculture scene that smelly era in American history is famous for. So, in other words, the guy wanted to recruit dirty, stupid hippies.
They're not people, they're hippies! Goddamn hippies!
And while trying to recruit said dirty hippies, Petty described the cult as a school that, quote, operates on the principle that life is a series of games. To play the games, a person must follow the rules by acting a certain way in every situation. Which, dude, come on, man. At least be subtle with the fact that you're brainwashing people here, okay? Express some tact. After indoctrinating these hippies and forming this group, Petty and his followers set forth on a mission to raise a new generation of children that would be brought up by them instead of their parents. Why would they do that? Well, I assume the Finders would say something along the lines of embracing the new age way of living, pioneering an alternative lifestyle, or searching for new dimensions of life. And I guess I don't really assume that because that's just exactly what they said. But I would say that that's just a f***ing excuse to abduct a ton of children to neglect, malnourish, and prey on from a bunch of dirty, uneducated, impressionable, tripping young hippies. A large portion of whom, let's face it, were probably more focused on following the Grateful Dead on their Eastern Seaboard tour than raising a child, and probably didn't even want their own children anyway. I'm obviously not saying that, like, all hippies fell into that group, but, you know, there were certainly some of them, and that's who he was finding here. So yeah, that's the Finders' origin story in a nutshell. And this 1987 arrest was the first time that their very concerning activities had been brought into the public eye, and in quite a big and shocking way at that. You see, this is the late 1980s when this is all going down, a time where someone wearing black eyeliner and a lip piercing was considered an angel of death sent from the devil himself. So, imagine how the public reacted to this shit. You see, during the 80s, there was this thing called the Satanic Panic, where everyone, mostly led by a bunch of stressed out, bored conservative housewives, were freaking the fuck out about the, quote, rise of Satanism, and pointing out recent events in pop culture like D&D and Ozzy Osbourne as proof. It was an era of Nancy Reagan swinging her big old Christian dick around, making everyone terrified that their kids' heavy metal music was gonna make demons crawl out of their assholes and go up into your own asshole while you sleep. I think that was her exact verbiage. So, it's no surprise that very soon after this 1987 arrest case went public, newspapers across the country started running tantalizing analog clickbait headlines that the Finders were an evil, child-abusing, satanic cult. Which, you might assume, from all this lowbrow shock-bait reporting, that just like the Christian moms responsible for the Satanic Panic's overreaction to all that other shit, like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, this was just another overblown, overpublished nothing burger, right?
Wrong!
God, I love using that sound effect. I can't stop. In stark contrast to the actual nothing burgers that these Satanic Panic people were whipping themselves into a frenzy about, the Finders had been accused from multiple sources of brainwashing these children, as well as some other very concerning stuff involving the cult's focus on children in general that we will get into later. The cult was also accused of having human remains buried on their Virginia farm and using these children in, quote, satanic rituals. But what? We're just supposed to take these very extreme claims from anonymous tips about a group brought to light in a highly publicized, controversial news event that everyone in the country could see seriously? I mean, it's not like there could be any hard proof that any of this was going on, right?
Wrong.
During an investigation into the Finders' compound in Washington, D.C., police found a photo album which contained a series of photos titled The Execution of Henrietta and Igor, which already sounds quite concerning right off the bat, but immensely more upsetting was the content of the photos themselves. Again, viewer discretion, it's advised. These photographs found in the Finders' compound pictured 3 children along with 3 men in robes, people, who in these photos were shown killing and mutilating goats. One of these photos, and this is pretty gross, once again, viewer discretion, even showed a young, smiling boy holding a dead goat fetus, presumably extracted from an also dead pregnant goat. So, I'm no religious expert or anything, but I have seen Eyes Wide Shut, and I know the signs of a fucking satanic ritual when I see one, okay? And robed men making children kill shit and goats in general are all pretty high on the list of satanic ritual type activities. And these are photographs, you know, this is hard proof. Okay, not just some anonymous tip from some random dude. A source, allegedly from inside the Finders, was reported by the Washington Post as saying that they had been recruited by the Finders with promises of, quote, financial reward and sexual gratification, and that they were invited by one member to, quote, explore Satanism with them. So, obviously, all of this, it's kind of concerning. Really, and the police discovering this information were trying to be good Samaritans and protect the public. In other words, to just do their damn jobs for once and actually look into these very concerning claims, for now, at least, until the CIA stepped in, but again, we'll get into that later. Back in Tallahassee, the police determined that these children may have been kidnapped, no idea what may have given off that impression, and were transported from D.C. to Florida, which would mean that these men were committing a crime across state lines, which now made this a federal case, so they called in the FBI. Tallahassee police then reached out to the authorities in Washington, D.C., where Mary told them that the cult headquarters was located, who apparently were like, oh, those guys? Oh yeah, we know those guys. They're called the Finders. Idiot, get with it, guys, stupid Floridians. This call then prompted the DC police and FBI to investigate the areas that the Finders were reported to be operating and engaging in these fucked up child rituals in, which included that Virginia farm, as well as an apartment building and warehouse in Washington, D.C. During the investigation of the farm in Virginia, the neighbors told police that vans full of children were frequently brought there and that the children could be heard, quote, hollering and crying all the time like they wanted something or something was hurting them. One neighbor also said that the Finders' leader, the so-called game caller Marion Petty, first introduced himself to her as a Boy Scout leader, which, untrue, first of all, and an incredibly sus cover. Like, why the hell would you say that? I guess because you're transporting mass amounts of children, so fair enough. The Finders' DC warehouse, however, as you may assume by it being a warehouse owned by a reportedly satanic cult, was probably the most concerning of these localities. When police arrived at the warehouse, they found that the windows were boarded up so there was no visibility to what was happening inside, and that the doors were padlocked shut from the outside with a heart-shaped lock, which, just that fact alone, just the shape chosen there for a device used to lock children in a boarded-up warehouse from the outside, really fucking disturbs me, personally. I mean, it's obviously way easier to source, you know, a normal-shaped padlock to use here. You'd have to, like, go out of your way to go and find a heart-shaped padlock to trap these kids inside of here. I mean, it's just that's so fucking weird, man. After busting off this creepy-ass lock, the police found no one inside. Allegedly. We'll get into that later as well. But did find clear evidence of prior occupancy, such as full bookshelves, maps, newspapers strewn on the floor, and various mattresses scattered around the warehouse. Also, mattresses, kind of the same vibe as a heart-shaped lock to me, both in this cult-operated warehouse and the van. Like, if it wasn't clearly fucking weird in some way, they would just say that they found a bed. You know, but the fact that it is simply referred to as a mattress is just so much more upsetting and suspect to me. The police also discovered something even more upsetting and suspect than the mattresses or even the heart-shaped lock. Large plastic bags full of some very concerning photographs. These bags were where they found the previously mentioned child goat mutilation ritual photo album, as well as other photos of children, some of them naked, as well as one photo of a child in chains. So, dude, you know, that there should be enough evidence that something fucked up is clearly going on here. Like enough to start locking some people up, right?
Wrong!
Well, as far as the kidnapping claims went, the Tallahassee police stated, quote, "It is our belief that these kids were not kidnapped, but that their parents gave them away because one of the rites of passages into this satanic organization." Wow, okay, I'm just realizing that they referred to it as a satanic organization in their police report. That's kind of, we'll get into why that's a little weird. God, this story's so fucked. Anyway, they said because one of the rites of passage into this satanic organization is that you have to give up your rights to your children, and that the leaders of this organization can do what they want with your children. Which, phrasing, that still does not sound fucking legal at all, but let's just move on. In regards to the photos of the children engaged in the pretty clearly satanic and at the very least incredibly fucked up goat mutilation ritual, the Associated Press reported that a spokesman from the Finders said the goats were, quote, butchered as a learning experience for the children, and that one member of the investigation into the Finders said the photos showed, quote, no evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Which, okay, sure. It might technically be legal to stand around in white robes and force children to mutilate goats. I really have my doubts that it even is in the context of everything else going on. But even if it was the case that it was legal, that still doesn't make it fucking okay. I mean, there was a photo of a kid smiling and holding a fucking dead goat fetus, for God's sake. Guys, I mean, unless that kid was like a 6-year-old Dwight Schrute or something, there is something just so very wrong happening there. But in a 2-page memo sent in to the police by Robert Terrell, a member of the Finders shown here disguised, wonder why he might be doing that, in a not at all creepy Ronald Reagan mask, he told a bit of a conflicting story. Terrell said that the goats in the photos had actually already been slaughtered, which does not make any goddamn sense, given that the photos actually show both the killing and mutilation of the animals. And Terrell also said that the men were simply wearing those creepy-ass robes to protect their clothing underneath. But that would also be a somewhat strange decision, given that the men were wearing white robes. And as anyone who has ever put on a pair of Air Forces will know, white stuff doesn't really stay white when you fucking kill a whole bunch of goats while wearing it. So, this same memo also conflicted with another part of the official reports, as it claimed that the 2 suited men in the van full of 6 dirty children initially set out on a trip to Berea, Kentucky, where the group was supposed to help establish a retirement community and where the children were supposed to be placed in school. This trip was apparently delayed for some unspecified reason, however, and according to the report Terrell gave, the group instead decided to go, quote, vacationing in Florida with the approval of the children's mothers. So, I hope you can see where this story, again, makes no goddamn sense, as the men themselves, when questioned by the police, told them directly to their mustachioed 1980s Florida cop faces that they were taking the children to Mexico to a school for the brilliant. But apparently the police missed, or simply didn't care, or were instructed by the CIA to ignore this clear and blatant contradiction here. Think it may be that third one, personally. But what about all those pictures of the naked children that they found in the warehouse? I mean, surely that's got to be a crime, right? I mean, that's a clear, undeniable case of CP possession happening there, right? Possession and production, in fact. Well, Terrell also explained in the 2-page memo that Houlihan, one of the men in suits arrested with the van full of dirty naked children in Florida, was a stepfather to one of the children and a natural father to another, and said about this, quote, "What parents does not have a photograph of their child at some point without any clothes on?" Now, I don't f***ing buy it. I don't buy this at all. But again, even if that were the case, most parents do not also have pictures of naked children locked in f***ing chains. Bro, okay, so, you know, what the hell? Police, are you really just gonna believe all this shit?
No. Well, yes.
Soon after this 2-page memo full of contradicting information and general bullshit was sent to the police, all charges against the group were dropped, the investigation into the finders was closed completely, the 2 suited men driving the van full of neglected, malnourished, dirty, bite-marked ridden, sexually abused children en route to Mexico, or was it Kentucky? Oh, I don't know, it must be both, tee-hee, who really knows, were let out of jail and set out to freely return to their gross-ass activities. And as far as anyone was concerned at that point, that was the end of the story. And that's where it would end for about 3 decades, until the U.S. Customs Office and the FBI themselves released their own classified documents on the finders. And if you thought shit was bad now, these documents reveal that this whole thing was so much worse than anyone, besides the cult themselves and the disgusting feds who covered this whole thing up, could have ever known. I mean, this shit is about to get crazy, okay? Now, this customs document is pretty long and contains some insane shit. I mean, some shit that I'm very surprised more people don't know about, just like this whole iceberg does in general, really. And this segment is already pretty long, so I'm going to talk about the most integral things that it talks about here. But if you're curious to know more, I think I'll do like a separate video on my second channel where I just read through the whole thing for you guys and talk about it. So that'll be linked in the description if I've made it already. So before I get into the customs and FBI stuff, first I'll briefly tell you some info gathered on a declassified report from the Tallahassee Police Department, as it reveals some very concerning items found in the van where those 2 suited men with the 6 dirty children were arrested that seem to have been left out or intentionally hidden from reports to the public. The report stated that in addition to the items previously known to the public, the officers also found in their search of the van a Chinese to English dictionary, a bag filled with photos of children, some nude, computer programming discs, and really, most disturbingly, given the context, a box of Trojan condoms. So that's gross and disturbing, but the documents from the U.S. Customs Department we're about to get into reveal information about the finders, once again, somehow even more gross and disturbing. So the 2 main characters of these documents are one U.S. Customs Department Special Agent Richard J. Martinez, who is the one who wrote all of this stuff I'm about to read, and one Detective Jim Bradley of MPD, the Washington, D.C. Police Department. The documents start off covering some clerical stuff, the original arrest of the 2 suited men in 1987, and then things start to get a little juicier. Martinez writes that the Tallahassee Police, abbreviated as TPD, contacted U.S. Customs for assistance checking some names, addresses, and a vehicle, I assume that stinky van they were all living in, through the U.S. Customs CP unit database. I assume that you know what that acronym means if you're on this part of the internet, like true crime stuff. hopefully not for any of the wrong reasons, but it stands for some words that YouTube really doesn't like when you use together in a sentence. So just look up what CP means if you don't know what I'm talking about here. Just make sure to add the what and does it mean to that search if you don't end up on several lists. And I do not mean the BuzzFeed kind. So TPD informed Customs that this request was on suspicion that these men may have been trafficking and providing these children for the purpose of producing CP, which, given that they were heading for Mexico with a very sus-ass excuse about taking these literally non-verbal children to a school for the brilliant and then later lied about that fact, seems very possible to me personally, especially given some details that we will see later in this report in terms of, trafficking children. And the fact that Mexico was involved here is also a big part of why the U.S. Customs Office is part of this, as crimes going across national borders is, kind of their thing and all. The report also revealed some new information about the arrest of Mike and Doug, those two suited van men. The report stated that upon being taken into custody and not cooperating at all, in addition to one of the men, lying on the floor face down for an extended period of time, the other then produced what the report in parentheses refers to as a business card. It's like one of the only words that is in parentheses that isn't a quote. I think that's pretty fun. What business he doing with this? This card had the man's name on one side and a statement on the other, which read that the bearer of the card was aware of his constitutional right to remain silent and that he intended to do so. So that's more sus than a pickle on a platter on a hot summer Sunday, isn't it? I mean, these men were just already strapped with physical cards basically saying, "We aren't telling you shit, Mr. Police." It's almost like, I don't know, they anticipated being questioned by, the police, as people who are doing crimes tend to do sometimes. Martinez later states that he was soon contacted by Detective Jim Bradley and told he would be conducting searches on the Finders' properties later that day. Bradley invited Martinez to come along for the search, since the whole thing involved the customs office and such. Jim also told Martinez that an informant had told MPD of a cult called the Finders, operating various, quote, businesses out of the warehouse in DC we talked about earlier, and were supposedly housing many children there. The informant provided, quote, specific information about the cult conducting, quote, blood rituals and sexual orgies involving children, as well as claiming the Finders were behind an unsolved murder. Martinez then describes how he and Detective Bradley later carried out the search of the Finders' warehouse, and this is where they uncovered the very disturbing information that was unknown to the public until the release of these reports and had seemingly been actively covered up. Martinez states that after making entry into the warehouse, he and Jim found several persons renting space from one man, Stuart Miles Silverstone, who appeared to be the only actual member of the Finders at the warehouse that day. Notice how this is already divulging from the official reports earlier, stating that no one was present in this warehouse during the investigation. Once again, a bit sus, right? I mean, the pickle platter strikes again. I mean, one could say this was almost like a complete fucking lie from the government, eh?
And remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you the government wouldn't do that, oh yes, they would.
Martinez and Jim found Silverstone, the Finders member, in a room of the warehouse which contained several computers, printers, and documents, which themselves contained some very fucked up shit. Some very incriminating information. Just on their first cursory examination of the documents, the agents discovered that they contained detailed instructions for, quote, obtaining children for unspecified purposes. But I think if you have to obtain them, you don't really have to specify the purpose of doing that there, bub. I mean, I don't think it's to teach them the heavenly word of Jesus Christ. Well, unless you're a priest, in which both things might happen. Okay. These instructions included various methods that could be used to obtain children, including the, quote, impregnation of female members of the Finders, which already sounds fucked up, but is actually somehow the least concerning method listed here. This is because the documents also detailed instructions for purchasing children, trading children, and even kidnapping children. So that's how the fuck are these people not immediately in jail for this, right? Well, we'll f***ing see why that is. Oh, we will f***ing see. Spoiler, it enrages me. And this whole obtaining children thing seems to me to be the entire purpose of the Finders cult, which, when I learned that, led me to a very unsettling realization. You see, when I heard of the Finders, I was quite curious as to, like, why they're called that, and nowhere in my research did I actually see any explanation for the name of this group. The Finders, right? It's kind of a weird name, isn't it? But if the entire purpose of your organization is to, you know, obtain children through purchase, trade, kidnapping, or literally creating them through impregnation, it leads me to believe that the Finders are there to find children, right? Which raises the much more concerning question, who are they finding them for? So just ponder on that as I continue with the agent's findings here. The two agents found telex messages which contained, quote, MCI account numbers on that creepy room's computer. I, probably like yourself, had no idea what that meant, so I looked into it and found out that MCI actually stands for Microwave Communications Incorporated, which, functions exactly the way it sounds by communicating through microwave radio signals. Which didn't even know that was a thing. I'm concerned by that. It sounds like there are just literal microwaves being sent out in the air. Like, okay, if anyone knows anything about this, please leave it in the comments. Okay, for the love of God, I need reassurance that there aren't microwaves just floating around everywhere around me, lest I start understanding all those people who are shooting at 5G towers in 2020, okay? I'm concerned. Once again, somehow even more concerning, however, were the messages actually being sent by the Finders over this microwave radio. One telex message found on the computer literally showed an explicit order for the purchase of 2 children from Hong Kong to be arranged through a contact at the actual Chinese embassy there. This is... Do you see why these documents were such a bombshell here? I mean, this is such specific, damning, provable evidence here. Other documents uncovered in this search expressed the Finders' interest in bank secrecy techniques and the Finders', quote, keen interest in terrorism, explosives, and the evasion of law enforcement. Really sounding like a completely innocent group that did nothing wrong, as they legally determined, right? Right. It also uncovered a detailed description of the 2 men's arrest in Tallahassee, which had literally happened the previous night at the time that the detectives were reading this on the computer. So how the f*** did they know about it at that point? Like, no one had made those details public knowledge yet at all. Just one of the many mysteries of this case. This computer also contained messages that were seemingly sent through an encrypted computer network to people involved in this operation with instructions to, quote, move the children and keep moving through different jurisdictions, as well as instructions on avoiding police detection as they did so. The 2 agents reported all this back to their offices and then returned the next day to make even more unsettling discoveries. This day, the agents found numerous documents that showed, quote, explicit sexual conduct involving the Finders, as well as many nude photographs, many of which were of children. At least one of these photos pictures a child who is apparently, as the documents state, quote, on display, whatever the fuck that means. The report did not specify, and appeared to, quote, accent the child's genitals, which is, this is really fucked up, dude. I'm covering a CIA iceberg, sure, but like, I didn't expect it to get this dark. Martinez was then presented with the photo album, which contained the goat blood ritual involving the children that I mentioned earlier, and he goes on to describe this whole event in more detail in the report, which you'll have to go to my separate video diving into these documents deeper if you want to hear about that. It's pretty gross. Further investigation revealed files relating to the group's, quote, activities in different parts of the world. The locations that Martinez observed in these files included London, Germany, the Bahamas, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Africa, Costa Rica, and Europe. as well as a file marked Palestinian and one marked Pentagon break-in. So, like, what the fuck is up with that? Another MPD agent also uncovered files with tons of information gathered on families totally unrelated to the finders, which this shit scares me. I mean, this all scares me quite a bit, but this part is like really particularly creepy to me. These files appeared to show information gathered through a, quote, systematic response to local newspaper advertisements for babysitters, tutors, and anything else related to unsupervised access to children. It appeared to show that a member of the finders was tasked with responding to these ads and then collecting as much information as possible as to the habits, identity, occupation, and any other personal information relating to the families posting these ads, as well as a large amount of data collected on various child care organizations. And I don't think I need to tell you why that is profoundly upsetting. Reports also went into detail about areas contained within the warehouse, including a large library, a hot tub, sauna, and a, quote, video room, which the report goes on to say appeared to be set up as a, quote, indoctrination center. Again, whatever that means, the report didn't go into any further detail. The agents also found what they called, quote, training centers for the children around the warehouse, what appeared to be an altar of some kind in the residential area of the warehouse, as well as many jars and bottles of urine and feces around the same area. And this is around the conclusion of Martinez's report into his immediate investigations in February. The documents then pick up again with Martinez describing a meeting set up with him and Detective Bradley about 2 months later on March 31st, 1987. And this is where things get really, really weird and deep state-ish is the only word I can think of to describe it, other than awful and slimy. Fuck. Martinez states that he had set up a meeting with Bradley to go over evidence relating to the case, but when Martinez arrived at MPD headquarters, he was told that Detective Bradley was unavailable. Instead, Martinez, quote, spoke to a third party who was willing to discuss the case on a strictly off-the-record basis. This, for now, unnamed third party told Martinez that all the passport data collected on the finders had been turned over to the State Department, who had concluded, quote, all travel and use of the passports was within the law and no action would be taken. This included travel to Moscow, North Korea, and North Vietnam from the late 1950s to mid-1970s. So that's okay. What the fuck is going on here? You know, like why is this group getting so much goddamn leeway from seemingly every level of government here? Well, what this third party then told Martinez should probably clear that up a bit for you. Martinez states in this report, quote, the individual further advised me of circumstances which indicated that the investigation into the activity of the finders had become a CIA internal matter. The MPD report has been classified secret and was not available for review. I was advised that the FBI had withdrawn from the investigation several weeks prior and that the FBI Foreign Counterintelligence Division had directed MPD not to advise the FBI Washington field office of anything that had transpired. Or, in other words, the CIA and the feds are burying this case, so stop looking into it.
You will cease your investigation immediately. You will bend your knee to me. I am of the Divine. You cannot win this battle and you will never uncover the truth. Heed this warning,
Martinez.
You nosy little bitch.
Well, I just knocked that dude's dick right back into his body, but I'm not done yet.
Martinez then closes the report by simply stating, no further information will be available. No further action will be taken. All right, so now we know that the CIA stopped the investigation into this satanic cult that seemed to clearly be running some kind of international child trafficking ring in its tracks. But the question that remains is, why? Well, there are many theories out there to answer that question, but based on the evidence, I unfortunately can't really give you a rock-solid answer there. What I can do is present you with the evidence that we do have and let you come to your own conclusions. And definitely let me know what you think about it in the comments. I want to know. So one thing to note here is that in Martinez's report, where he said that this third party told him to cease his investigations, Martinez states that the case had become a, quote, CIA internal matter. And that phrasing of it being an internal matter coming from an intelligence agency would seem to mean that the CIA was implicitly claiming that the agency does have an internal association with the Finders, which one article delving into the case points out would, quote, link the CIA with evidence of organized child trafficking, child abuse, and allegations of ritual abuse and mind control. And Martinez himself also seemed to find this entire situation very fishy as well, as he later submitted a whistleblower complaint where he identifies the third party who told him the CIA was shutting down the investigation as one Sergeant Stitcher of the DC Police Department. Martinez stated in this whistleblower complaint, quote, I attempted to access the evidence collected for a period of approximately 2 months. I was unsuccessful in gaining that access and was informed by Sergeant Stitcher, now deceased, that the Finders was a CIA front gone bad and that the evidence was unavailable. To back up this narrative of the Finders in some way being a, quote, CIA front gone bad, a 1993 report from the Washington Times written by journalist Paul M. Rodriguez stated, quote, a Metropolitan Police document, which that is the DC Police Department, dated February 19, 1987, quotes a CIA agent as confirming that his agency was sending its personnel to a, quote, Finders Corp Future Enterprises for training in computer operations. And a later Customs Service report shows that the CIA, quote, admitted to owning the Finders organization as a front for a domestic computer training operation, but that it had, quote, gone bad. A senior Customs Service official confirmed the content of the memos. Another piece of this puzzle involves the founder of the Finders cult himself, Marion Petty, who was once employed high in the U.S. military, as well as his son, who worked for the CIA-fronted airline Air America, which was actually the very first entry of Part 1 of this iceberg. Most integrally, though, it involves Marion's late wife, Isabel Petty, who was actually just straight up employed to the CIA directly for 21 years, 1952 to 1973, and had even had passports to restricted countries at the time, such as China, North Korea, North Vietnam, and Russia, which you may notice were the same places that the Finders group was implicated as using their passports to visit by the State Department, apparently legally, as they concluded. So, that's a pretty close-ass connection from the CIA to this fucking cult right off the bat there. You may have noticed that I mentioned earlier that the FBI also released their own declassified documents about the Finders, but I haven't gone into it, and that is because they released like 600 fucking pages where like half of it is just completely redacted. So yeah, really good job of declassifying there, fellas. That's just the FBI for you there, I guess. So because of that, it's a lot to get through, first of all, and hard to piece together based on all the redacted information. But the channel Blame It on Jorge on YouTube, who actually has a great video on the Finders that had a lot of good resources for this research, goes into detail on some of the documents which seem to implicate the CIA even further in this cover-up. These FBI documents, according to Jorge, that is, he kind of fills in some of the redacted blanks here based on available information and cross-referencing other FBI documents, state that the Customs Special Agent Martinez alleged that the Finders were involved in a well-organized child abuse scheme, which, yeah, I think that's pretty obvious to anyone with a brain at this point. And Martinez also claimed that the CIA, in conjunction with the State Department and the FBI's Foreign Counterintelligence Section, conspired to cover up this child abuse. These same FBI documents also contained a segment stating, quote, although the CIA claims their only involvement was that redacted, who I assume might be Marion Petty there, his son, or most likely his wife, was a former employee of the agency, they stated that they were monitoring this case from the beginning. Though that's a bit suspect. I think they may have been involved in quite a bit more than just monitoring from the very beginning. And the writer of these FBI documents would appear to agree with me on that, as the document concludes with this summary. Quote, "It is the writer's belief that the Finders organization is and has been utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency as a disinformation service, spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the United States and overseas. This group, for the most part, is made up of overeducated non-achievers who lacked the inborn initiative to succeed on their own. Therefore, they fell in with a charismatic leader who gave them directions and self-importance. To the most part, this organization individually is harmless. However, when directed and monitored by a controlling factor, they are capable of destructive and illegal activities. As in any cult structure, the main drive is for the group, and individual values and ideology is lost. Therefore, when a member is asked to perform a task that heretofore may have been objectionable, he or she performs this mission for the good of the group. As to the abuse of the children, I do not think that the child abuse was a planned tactic of this group, but as in any cross-section of society, sick and demented subjects belong to a cult as well. Really, no kidding. I do believe that the shaping of the children is a planned experiment of this group. As in the case of the Nazis, they struggle for a perfect society, thereby in their own way tried to form a group of children and ultimately adults that did not suffer from the ills of normal society, but took only the benefits that afforded them perfection. Lastly, I do not feel that the Finders have actually disbanded as reported by their leaders, but instead, as reported in their master plan, have simply appeared to disband to prevent further detection by law enforcement or social service officials. I firmly believe that this group should be monitored in a general sense, and if further developments occurred, they should be noted. And now we get to the final document covered by the FBI, which goes over an interview with a retired CIA agent.
What's up? What's up? What's up? How you feeling, man? I'm pretty lucky. Say what? I'm fine.
In connection to the Finders. The documents redact this retired agent's name, so I will simply refer to him as Agent Smith, for obvious reasons.
Stan Smith, prepare to be...
The report states, quote, Agent Smith was interviewed within the Office of General Counsel for the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley, Virginia. After being advised as to the identity of the interviewing agent and the purpose of the interview, Smith provided the following information. Smith advised that he retired from the CIA on redacted. He indicated that in February 1987, he was redacted Special Activities Division, Office of Security. Smith related that the Special Activities Section within the Office of Security was responsible for counterintelligence work to include internal investigations of CIA employees, media leak investigations, and investigations dealing with the impersonation of CIA employees. Smith indicated that his office had a regular interface with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the United States Department of State, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. Smith was shown photocopies of his February 18, 1987 memorandum and of February 19, 1987 Washington Metropolitan Police Department report of investigation, both documents concerning the Finders group. Smith was then asked to relate his recollection of the circumstances regarding this memo and the Finders group. Smith related that his first involvement with the Finders group most probably began in 1987 as the result of the media's coverage of the Finders investigation. Smith advised that the media at the time was indicating the Finders had some connection to the CIA. Wonder why. Smith related further that he had looked into the matter and recalled that there were two connections between the CIA and the Finders group. Smith stated that the first connection was that, and that's where it ends. The FBI redacted literally everything he said from then on. So, if that doesn't tell you something fishy's going on here, I don't know what will, but the dude said they had connections. The FBI just won't tell us what they are. This case in many ways reminds me of MK Ultra, and many speculate that there was, in fact, involvement between the two, the Finders and MK Ultra, as they did operate for a time simultaneously, so, that's certainly not out of the realm of possibility there. But this case reminds me of MK Ultra in that there's a lot under the surface that seems insane and depraved and hard to believe, with one involving LSD-fueled mind control and torture, and the other straight-up satanic rituals and child trafficking. And most importantly, with both having connections to the CIA. Now, with MK Ultra, it's really a blessing that we actually know it even existed. If it were up to the CIA, we never would have even heard about it or known exactly what their connection to it was at the very least, like so many other terrible things that they've been involved with, which I'm sure exist and that they've successfully kept under wraps this whole time. And that seems to me to be exactly what they've managed to do here, halfway successfully, at least with the Finders. One thing the Finders don't have in common with MK Ultra, though, at least I hope, is that the Finders are actually still out there. That's right. I mean, they were never prosecuted for anything, any of this, and technically were declared innocent after the case was shut down by the CIA. So, no one ever really forced them to stop. They've certainly seemed to have learned their lesson about operating more secretly and in the shadows, or are maybe being helped by some, agency of some kind to stay hidden, since we haven't heard much about them after all this came out. But one thing is for sure, they are still around, still doing whatever it is that they're doing, most likely finding, just like it says blatantly in their name. And I honestly think that that's probably the most disturbing part of this entire story. So that was a fucking bummer of an entry. That was a real sad one. So let's lighten the mood a bit, I guess, with this next story. Well, as light as you can get while still talking about disturbing classified CIA operations by talking about Devil Eyes. Man, I mean, look, we've talked about a lot of silly, wacky, cartoonish, outlandish, nonsensical, asinine, idiotic, autoerotic, stupid things that the CIA has done in this series. Okay, so I'm honestly really desensitized at this point, but guys, this one, man, holy f***ing shit, this f***ing one. Is it the most evil thing they've done? No, absolutely not. Far from it. We're not going to talk about, what would it be, a third genocide of this series that they were behind so far? No, it wasn't that. Was it the silliest, wackiest, most cartoonish thing that the CIA has ever made me question the reality that I inhabit with? I think it just may be. I think it just may be. It's literally cartoonish. That's not even a metaphorical adjective for this one. You'll see. Let's just get into it. So, we're all familiar with that thing that rhymes with mine, L. Kevin, Shrine, L, 7, 11, K9, 11, that thing that happened in 2001, September, specifically, that YouTube really doesn't like when I bring up. It was kind of a big deal at the time, kind of big news. Well, that whole aerial atrocity was apparently perpetrated by this guy. Wait, no, I mean this guy. Although, really, maybe it was the first guy. I'm still not fully convinced. Well, this guy really wanted to murk this guy. This must be fun for you who are just listening to this podcast style and not looking at the screen. I'm showing George W. Bush and Mr. Laden, first name Osama, for context. Osama was the leader of a group that shares the same initials as Al-Qaeda, and Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were based in Afghanistan at the time of the attacks. So, Bushy Boy over here decided to launch the incredibly popular and not at all problematic War on Terror, invading Afghanistan and desperately searching for the all-time hide-and-seek champion of the world, Mr. Bin Laden. However, they just couldn't find him anywhere. Not under the bed, not in the washing machine, not even in that weird little crevice in the crawl space behind all the old Christmas decorations, okay? I mean, the guy, he was just too damn good at the game. But that is because Osama and Al-Qaeda had actually fled to hide across the border in neighboring Pakistan, which...
Immigration consistently ranks as one of the top issues of the 2024 election. Last year, red states had enough of people pouring through the border. Texas Governor Greg Abbott engineered a plan to get border states to ship migrants to blue cities, such as New York City, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. What was at first seen as a political stunt quickly became a wake-up call. Now today, the one thing both sides can agree on is that the border is a mess and something does need to be done about it. While policymakers duke out what can be done to fix the situation, people like whistleblower Tara Lee Rodas, who worked on the ground, had urgent concerns. She testified before Congress this week to outline how the policy mess has translated into an abuse and trafficking situation for children.
One key area of concern for Rodas was how gangs such as MS-13 were sponsoring kids and then launching them into a maze of abuse and horror. She says when she reported what she saw, her badge was taken. Health and Human Services whistleblower Tara Rodas is here now to shine a light on this situation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you shining a light on what we now know is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
Yeah, when I was watching your testimony, you talked about how the things you saw had fundamentally changed your life. What are the horrors that Americans need to know about?
Well, I think the fact that the United States government has used billions of taxpayer dollars to put children in what is modern day slavery is appalling. It is shameful. And people just don't realize that the children who show up at the border alone, these children are here alone, they're very vulnerable, and then we're shipping them to criminals, traffickers, and members of transnational criminal organizations like MS-13 and 18th Street Gang and other cartels. Honestly, had I not seen it myself, I could not believe that the U.S. government has become the middleman in a child trafficking operation.
So when you say child trafficking operation, you're talking about what happens to them when they actually get here to the U.S. or the process of coming over the border?
Yeah, the process of them coming over the border. The children were telling us they were being recruited by bad actors here in the United States saying, hey, if you come here, instead of making $2.50 a day in Guatemala, this was a real case that I worked on. Instead of $2.50 a day, I'm going to pay you $6 an hour. Now you have to stay with me until your debts are paid. So the children we knew were in debt bondage. They were telling us that, and they were not able to leave the sponsor until the debts were paid.
What role does the immigration crisis play in cartels being able to move these children across the border?
That is a very great question that should be asked of the Secretary of DHS and HHS, because right now they're not information sharing at all. In the past, HHS would share the sponsor name with DHS, so they could actually look to see if these people were criminals. Now that information sharing has been completely cut off. So that's one major thing that has contributed to this crisis. The other thing is HHS, because they're not investigative, they're not law enforcement. They have no idea how to properly train people to look for trafficking concerns. So they have no business taking children into their care, releasing them into the United States to people they've never seen, to homes they've never visited. We would never allow this sort of horrific treatment to happen to children here in the United States. And we need to stand up. This is not a political issue. We need to stand up for these children. They have nobody. They have nobody once they get here. And many of them cannot even speak Spanish. So those who come here speaking Spanish have some help, right? We have some law enforcement and people who can speak Spanish, but many of these children speak Mayan dialects. They're very indigenous Mayan dialects like Quiche, Quechua, and Mam. They have no way to ask for help. They become victims, captive victims of their sponsors. It's evil.
Where is Child Protective Services on this? Because that is an organization, it differs in the many states, goes by many different names, is often a very robust organization that does check in on a number of families in difficult situations with children and children in foster care and that kind of thing. Why are they not shining a light on this?
Because HHS is holding secret the names and locations of the sponsors of the children. It's unthinkable that there are attorney generals, like my attorney general in the state of Virginia, Jason Miyares, has been asking repeatedly. There are children. We have 22 children missing in a small town here in Virginia of Culpeper, and HHS refuses to give the critical information to the states that could save the children. HHS is holding this data hostage. They won't allow anyone to see it, because they know once law enforcement and the states can see what's happened to the children, that there is no rug big enough in the universe to put this under.
When HHS let you go, what was their rationale, and how did they justify that to you?
So what they claimed as cover for action. So I reported the first case of MS-13, of a known affiliated MS-13 actor on our site who was attempting to sponsor 2 young teenagers, 13 years old, one from our site and one from the Fort Bliss emergency intake site. As soon as I reported that case, that's when everything changed. I went from being, they appointed me to the deputy of the director for our case management team. I was highly trusted, highly valued in all of the top executive meetings. They valued my input. They brought me in on meetings with the Executive Office of the President, the U.S. Digital Service. But the moment I reported that MS-13 case, it took them less than 3 weeks to swiftly accuse me of wrongdoing, completely falsely, and then threaten me with investigation and walked me off the site with security. So HHS, ORR, their federal field specialist, which was one of the highest ranking HHS people on the site, along with security, had me clean out my belongings from my workspace in front of my peers midday. We call that the perp walk.
Yeah.
The walk of shame. They try to shame you in front of your peers while simultaneously scaring anybody else from coming forward. So they learned I made protected disclosures to Department of Justice, OIG, and HHS, OIG, and they outed me in front of everybody and then, falsely accused me of wrongdoing. It's absurd. They were trying to hide that they were knowingly, because they were aware. I advised them, this sponsor has known MS-13 gang affiliation, and they didn't want it to get out. So they decided to try to get rid of me instead.
It's incredible, because you'd think the political upside of actually doing something about an MS-13 contact would be good for someone on on either side of the political aisle. That the concerns about illegal immigration, about trafficking of children, does not need to be political at all, or people on both sides of the aisle obviously are against that and want something done about it. So you'd think a more muscular response to this problem could be a win, but here you are calling attention to it, and your former bosses in the Biden administration saying, no, keep this quiet.
Yeah, it really is astounding, because I volunteered to support the Biden administration with this crisis at the border. As a Spanish speaker, my husband is from El Salvador. I've been to Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, and I thought I can be there to help the children. And once we realized they were trafficking them in June of 2021 is when we started reporting that, I begged, I appealed. I said, look, no one is going to blame you if you sound the alarms. I said, just sound the alarms and say, look, bad actors have figured out ways to exploit our program. They are using name fraud, address fraud. They are sponsoring from one apartment. There's like 3 sponsors in one apartment. We have children, like 40 children going to an apartment building. I said, look, if you sound the alarm, you can be the hero. Be the hero. Call in the big guns, call FBI, call Homeland Security Investigations, please. I said, no one is going to blame you for sounding the alarm. And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it.
It's so sad. It feels like there's a willful turning of a blind eye to this. And there's not, like you said, people who can really stand up and vouch for these children because they're in a country that they're unfamiliar from. What would your message be to HHS moving forward?
Release the data so the children can be found. HHS has admitted over 85,000 children they've lost contact with. That's what they admit. That's what they admit. They're losing track of 1/3 of every child that crosses the border. That's totally unacceptable. That is an F. These are children. Children. Release the information so the children can be found. My appeal is find the children, rescue the children. It's unthinkable that there are children right now who need help. They're in crisis and no one is coming for them because HHS is holding the information hostage.
Tara Rodas, thank you so much for coming on Rising to tell us more about the situation. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for shining a light. Thank you.
Freeze! Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
I want to ask you a bunch of questions, and I want to have them answered immediately.